Hey, what's up, folks? Lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers here, joined by fellow Lifetime Longhorn CJ Vogel, getting back to our way too early breakdown and your Texas Longhorn season previews. And we are talking about the Week 8 opponent for the Longhorns, probably the biggest game of the year for the Longhorns, the Georgia Bulldogs. They very well may be number one in the country, CJ, when they come to Austin, Texas. Kirby Smart and what he's built there, a dominant force of nature there, Georgia. And I've even been doing some research and heard some people having this conversation. It's a scary thought that there are some people asking, could this be Kirby Smart's best team? What he's the two national title teams, and hell, he's got two national titles, but the truth is he's come close with another two times. Probably could have 4 or 5 of those national titles if everything had went right for Kirby Smart. But thinking about, his mentor, Nick Saban, which we'll get into that a little bit too. He's off to a better start in his career than Nick Saban. He's won national titles sooner, and he's actually off to a better start overall in terms of his resume. A lot of impressive things to say about Georgia, which we'll dive into and break it down. But what are your thoughts, CJ? Even entertaining the possibility this is the best team that Kirby Smart has had, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, it sure is, right? Especially when you look at what he's done since 2020, basically. Georgia right now is the gold standard in college football. Yep. For years under Nick Saban, it was Alabama. Now that Nick Saban's retired, and we've seen Georgia take over 2 national championships. Rod, 42-2 in their last 3 seasons.
Crazy.
That's remarkable. And you could make the argument a year ago that, hey, if Georgia made the college football playoff, there's a good chance they're the ones lifting the trophy at the end of the year over Michigan, right? They're that talented a year ago, and to say that they're coming back with even more talent this year, pretty remarkable. I know you mentioned Texas-Georgia might be a game in which both teams are in the top 5. Georgia looks like they might be the number 1 team in the country coming into the season. I want to put it in this perspective, right? Texas was the number 2 team in the preseason All-SEC poll, right?
Yeah.
The votes for that, Georgia 165 first-place votes. Texas had 27. So there's quite a gap in how teams and media and members in the college football world are perceiving Georgia right now versus the Texas Longhorns. And again, Texas is very talented. Sarkisian went on record saying, hey, we believe this is our most talented team. So we'll see when these teams face off. But, Rod, there's one thing for me that stands out with Georgia. First off, it's the continued continuity of Kirby Smart, obviously bringing back Carson Beck this year for year 5 of college football, second year as a starter. That's huge.
Yep.
Secondly, it's not just the defense, right? We've seen it year in, year out, whether it be, Jalen Carter, some of these big-time guys that we've seen go top 10, first round, day 2 picks for Georgia, those vaunted defenses year after year. Rod, they averaged 39.5 points a year ago. They're getting it done on offense, and there's reason to think even without Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers this year, they're going to have enough weapons to be just as dangerous and explosive on the offensive side of the ball. Also, and we'll dive into it here in a bit, third downs. That was the biggest takeaway I had when doing the deep dive on the numbers with Georgia football on both sides of the ball. They are elite. I can't wait to dive into it. But absolutely, this will be a huge game, and Texas fans should be very excited for it, even with F1 coming to town that weekend.
Yeah, no doubt. It's and I'll give you a couple of little tidbits that I got doing some research on it and why this could be Kirby Smart's best team. I thought I was like, oh man, it might be hyperbole throwing it out there. Let me do some research. There's obviously you can make that case. They got the most talented quarterback that he's had in the Kirby Smart era, and might be the best quarterback in the country. He's a multi-year starter now, coming back second year as a starter. Most returning production for Georgia since 2017. Defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator, bringing those back. Sark talks about how big that is in terms of the continuity factor. They got the most continuity at the top since 2021. They're motivated because they feel like they got last year. All right, one loss and didn't make it to the college football playoff. You talk about psychologically how, Kirby Smart's brilliant at being able to flip the script and turn them into an underdog somehow, 42-2 last 3 years. Yet they feel like, everybody's counting them out. Of course, I think getting into it, this Georgia team, the lines of scrimmage, specifically for them, that's always the case, really, really strong this year. And some people saying might be the best O-line potentially that Georgia's ever had too. But let's get right to it. Let's start on the offensive side of things, because you're right. Usually when you're talking about Georgia, Kirby Smart football, you're talking about defense, and the offense Yeah, the offense has. I'll give you a number that shocked me: 4th in yards per play last year with a Power 5. I mean, this is a really elite offense. 3rd in EPA per play, 6th in explosive pass play rate. They get it done. They're bringing back Carson Beck. And what I love about Carson Beck's game, he's a quick. He processes really quickly, and on top of that, he has a quick release.
Yeah.
So it is hard as hell to get to Carson Beck. 2.39 seconds is his average time to throw. That's a top 5 number in the Power 4. He has one of the quickest releases I've ever seen for any of these quarterbacks coming out in this class. He has how about this? Over 71% of his throws are considered accurate throws. That's the best in FBS. So he's on them. He's accurate, processes quickly, and gets rid of football quickly. What you want to try to do is kind of force him to hold on to the ball just a little bit because he's a rhythm thrower and he gets the ball out on time. And in that offense, he just seems to be really compatible with what they're doing right now. Over 80% adjusted completion percentage last year, 3rd in the FBS. You can see why he's considered to be the top quarterback coming off the board in 2025.
Yeah, I thought there would be some concern about whether or not Georgia's offense under Mike Bobo after Todd Monken left for the Baltimore Orioles the Baltimore Ravens would kind of remain that level of explosiveness. And we saw it. I mean, hey, Rod, tremendous numbers there, yards per play, right? Top 10 numbers there, top 10 numbers in points per game, top 10 numbers in yards per game. And the number one thing that stood out to me was they converted 3rd down 55.6% of their attempts. That was the number one mark by 4.5 ticks. That's incredible for the Georgia Bulldogs last year in 2023. Of course, you do lose a really, really, really just 2 valuable pieces. That's Ladd McConkey. That's Brock Bowers. However, you start looking at what they've returned, and I don't think that they'll be lacking any type of weapons in 2024, right? You look at Colby Young, Dylan Bell, Ra Thomas, all 3 guys, really, really important pieces. Ra Thomas and Dylan Bell were guys that were a part of the team last year as well. Dominic Levet, another piece that was on the Georgia Bulldogs last year. And then you go out and you add a London Humphreys from Vanderbilt, who I'm a big fan of. Right around 480, 500 yards a year ago. So it's not like he was lighting up the stat sheet. But then you go back and you watch some of his tape and you say, oh, yeah, this brother can play some football. That's a very talented ball player. He looks like an older, more mature Parker Livingstone, if you will, with the 6'4" body frame. You know, he can kind of move a little bit more than you would expect at that frame. But, Rob, that offensive line, and we've heard Jerry Hamilton, our friend over here at On Texas Football, mention it time and time again. They believe in that facility, there's 7 or 8 long-term offensive linemen in the NFL, right?
NFL vets, basically NFL veterans that will sign second contracts in the league. They got that many guys. Wow.
How often do you see that ever, right? There probably weren't many seasons where Alabama had that, but you see that this year with Georgia. Obviously, Tate Ratledge gets all the national headlines. He's a first-team All-SEC member. Xavier Truss, another guy that received SEC honorees. And then Ernest Green, who Texas finished second for in his recruitment. Really, really going to be taking that next step in my eyes. Very talented football player.
They have 2 you can consider top 5 to top 10 guards in college football.
It's crazy.
Like that, because Dylan Fairchild is damn good too. I mean, how about this? I'll give you a stat. Dylan Fairchild among Power 5 guards, and this is Pro Football Focus pass blocking numbers, 86.8 pass blocking grade. That was 4th among Power 5 guards. He didn't allow a QB hit or a sack in true pass sets. The only guards ahead of him, 2 of them were ahead of him. One of them is Tate Ratledge. His own teammate is ahead of him in those pass blocking numbers because Tate Ratledge, 3rd among Power 5 guards in Pro Football Focus pass blocking grade, 87.4. They are elite on the interior, man. And you're right. They're really deep. They're experienced, even on the tackle position. They're experienced and talented. This might be the most talented group, period, of the entire team. And they don't have a weakness on the team, guys. They don't really have a true Shakespearean flaw of any kind. You know, in Texas, we talk about what's happening with the corner spot opposite Malik Muhammad. What about those D tackles? That's an uncertainty there. You know, Texas got a couple of things you could bring up. Georgia really doesn't have any of those. That's really not that concerned with Georgia and what they've done offensively. So offensive line is deep, maybe one of the top 3 best in college football. And the tight end position, he lost Brock Bowers, and he was one of the freakiest tight ends I had ever seen. And I got a Brock Bowers man crush. I really do, because I wish he was playing for the Texans, my team. He was an elite prospect that demanded the attention of the defense constantly. They don't have that kind of guy, but remember in Texas, I believe, was recruiting this young man via the transfer portal, Benjamin Urosek from Stanford, the transfer tight end. He ended up at Georgia. They also have Oscar Delp, who had he was basically open on 96% of his targets in 2023. That put him in a 99th percentile. Benjamin Urosek actually has the most career receiving yards of any returning tight end in the Power 4. So they got experience in the tight end position. Maybe they don't have a proven commodity yet at wide receiver that can take over, but I think that'll materialize during the season. Carson Beck's too good, O-line's too good, and I'm with you. I love the offensive system. Didn't change a lot when Monken left. Kind of picked up right where they left off there. And we can't forget about what some people are saying may be the most impactful transfer, one of the most impactful in the SEC, Trevor Etienne.
Yeah.
Getting the younger brother of Travis Etienne, and he came from Florida. And there are a lot of people that believe that at Florida, he was limited in some of the things he could do because of the talent around him, maybe because of the offensive system and some of the struggles there offensively with Florida. That won't be the case here at Georgia. You may see him shine.
I think you do. I think it'd be very hard for a very talented running back to not shine behind that offensive line, right? He still had about 850 yards a year ago at Florida, in which he was splitting time with Montrell Johnson over there. Mm-hmm. So a bit of a surprise towards the end of the year that it wasn't Etienne that was, kind of the bell cow there, but he was an all-team, first-team SEC honoree in the preseason poll and team that was released earlier this weekend, Rod. So there's a lot of expectations there. When you look at what Georgia's built on that offense, not only at tight end, but wide receiver, there's not a flaw right now when you look at it on paper. Very much similar to what Texas is building on their offense. Now, the question is, will that defense still be elite? And right now, I don't have a reason to suspect that it won't. There's no reason to think that under Kirby Smart. And what we've seen last year, 16.3 yards per game allowed. That was the 7th best in all of college football. And let me tell you, you don't move the ball very easily against the Georgia defense. 291 yards per game allowed. That's the 8th best mark in college football. Rod, they average 200 more yards offensively than what they're allowing defensively. That's tremendous. I can't believe that it was such a discrepancy when looking at the numbers earlier today. But that defense, again, from top to bottom, whether it be Mikael Williams, Malachi Starks, they got some dudes, and they'll be flying around the football this year 100%.
Dudes and dogs. They got that dog in them. Got them dudes and dogs. No, you're right. I've seen big boards for the 2025 draft. You guys know I'm a mock slut. I'll look at any mock. Anybody does. And a lot of them have Mikael Williams, the edge rusher, number 1 guy on the board, top guy taken off the board. You may not know who he is. He's just another freak that Georgia has recruited and developed to being a top NFL prospect. And one of the themes you'll realize that you'll that reveals itself, you'll start to see doing research on the Georgia defense, the backups, they're all kind of 5-star guys that they've been stockpiling, waiting their turn. Look at the D-line. Okay, we know Mikael Williams, he's a stud. They got 4 D linemen who played at least 325 snaps in 2023, so they returned a lot of experience up front. And I just talked about Mikael Williams might be the number 1 edge in the country. But then they got 3 5-stars behind them on the D-line, Jordan Hall, Joseph Ajonye, Damon Wilson. These are guys just waiting. They're like Texas quarterback room. They just got 5 stars, just waiting their turn.
Rod, Joseph Jonah Ajonye, that was a kid out of Conroe Oak Ridge last year, a 5-star kid out of Texas.
I didn't know that.
He's 4th string right now. You don't see that. He's way back there on the depth chart, but he is so talented, and they have such talent right now that we can afford that development. And then, obviously, you buy into the system. You understand what the issue is with the defensive line and trust the process. And I tell you what, 2 or 3 years, he's going to be up there on that front line wrecking havoc. That's for sure. But to your point, I was looking at it earlier. So many guys that we've recognized the top of defensive, big boards recruiting wise. One name that stuck out to me, and I remember covering him in high school, was Julian Humphrey out of Clear Lake in the Houston area. That's a kid that runs 4.3. So when you talk about the speed that Texas will be bringing offensively, they have that in their secondary right now. Julian Humphrey was a 10.3 guy. He'll run in the 4.3s in the pro combine. Listen, I think he's a very talented football player. The issue with him, he gets a little grabby. I think there might be an opportunity for a double move to get him in some point this year. But that speed that they have in their back secondary is elite, and they have the talent to back it up as well. The one thing that also stood out, again, I mentioned third downs, Rod.
Yeah.
26.7% conversion. We talked about how successful Texas was a year ago at stopping and getting teams off of the field on third downs. Georgia just as good. Texas was the first number one team in the country a year ago at 24.8%. Georgia 26.7%. That's the third best mark in all of college football a year ago. So they're great offensively by moving the change, and they're great defensively by getting teams off the field. And that's why you see such a discrepancy in their yards per game allowed versus gained.
It's unbelievable. And you go look at the back seven. You just talked about the secondary a little bit. Some people believe if there is a vulnerability potentially, maybe it's in the back, the secondary, because you return only 2 of your 5 starters in that secondary. So maybe that's the key. But at linebacker, they got 2 studs returning. Smell Mondin Jr. is his name. I hope I didn't mispronounce that. CJ Allen, who started, I think is a true freshman for them. He's a stud. And we talked about the 5. It's a theme on defense. They got 5-star players behind them. Justin Williams, Chris Cole. They got a sophomore, Raylan Wilson, that linebacker, supposed to be really, really good. Secondary, though, Malachi Starks might be the best safety in the country. A lot of people have him as the top safety taken in the 2025 draft off the big board. He's a stud, man. He had 7 forced incompletions last season, 7th best run defense grades. He's not 5'2" DB, not really anything he can't do. Another cornerback, Dalen Everett. This is a guy that third among SEC cornerbacks in open target rate allowed at 27%, which is pretty good. Oh, yeah. And no, they got some 5 stars behind those guys. Ellis Robinson, the 4th cornerback, KJ Bowden, the safety. I mean, the theme is 5 stars behind the starters. Like everywhere. You said, it's crazy. But one thing I think is really interesting, I can't wait to see this chess match between, Kirby Smart on the defensive mastermind he is, and the brilliance offensively of Steve Sarkisian. And one of the things that Kirby Smart's done a great job of, and a lot of people around the country have watched his blueprint for this, is defending RPOs. And he talks about how I think he describes it as a cheat safety, how he gets his safeties to cheat so that they can defend the RPO. So if they're deep middle field safeties when they play single high coverage, isn't far away from that tag route on the RPO. So he brings them close to line of scrimmage, and he basically has them shuffled instead of backpedal opposite of the alignment wherever they're rotating. And in order for them to be closer to the tag route. So even with Texas loves the RPO. Sark describes it as an RPO-based passing game. It'll be challenged because he's got a certain way he likes his safeties to help bring in support to defend the RPOs by bringing them close to the line of scrimmage. Now, as you know that, though, maybe you can take advantage of that if you're Sark. Because Sark actually has a fake RPO. Yeah, Sark has a fake RPO. It's supposed to look like your RPO, smells like an RPO, looks like an RPO, but it's actually not one. It's actually a design pass. So maybe the fake RPO comes out versus Georgia because Kirby Smart's really good at defending those concepts, or at least he has a cheat code and a cheat safety to help him defend those. And also defending spread concepts. He's really good at defending spreads because he talks about how, and by the way, he did this versus Texas when they played them in 2018 in the Sugar Bowl. He talks about playing more odd defenses versus spread teams, using those 4 eyes, 3 down linemen more versus spread teams to give them more options and solutions versus those spread teams. One thing I also noticed that he admitted, they don't blitz their secondary as much versus spread teams, blitz more the linebackers and fewer secondary blitzes because he said that got them in trouble in earlier years there at Georgia. This guy has done a ton of research on defending spread concept, defending the most modern progressive concepts and schemes, and there is no more modern, I should say, and more progressive offense than Steve Sarkisian's.
Yeah, I don't think there will be any surprises in terms of what Kirby Smart would see as a defensive play caller, right? You know he's got a counter for anything. However, Rod, there was a surprise for me whenever I was, kind of diving deep into these Georgia defensive stats. If I told you they were outside of the top 100 in 2023 in takeaways per game, would you believe me?
No.
Well, they ranked 104th.
Wow.
At 1.2 takeaways per game. I thought that was pretty surprising. But that also tells me they play such sound defense and they trust where position that they're in that they don't need to take that extra gamble in going for an errant pass or a ball up in the air, or we're not looking to strip everything. We're just looking to get everybody on the ground because we know that if you run the ball 3 times in a row, you're not getting 10 yards on us. I thought that was really interesting. Texas on the opposite side ranked right outside the top 25. They were 26th in the country a year ago with 1.7 takeaways per game. So I thought that was interesting, right? Because we hear all the time about just how explosive, dangerous, formidable that Georgia defense is, yet they don't take the ball away. So if I'm looking at it in the way that Texas might be able to steal a game against Georgia, and I say steal, right? Because
I agree with you.
It's tough to say that with 2 top 5 opponents likely to be playing one another. But at the same time, Georgia is that number 1 team. We talked about the distance from number 1 versus number 2 in the SEC media poll earlier. However, we saw Texas win the turnover battle against Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That would be the key. We saw Oklahoma win the turnover battle against Texas in Dallas. They won the ball game as a result. If you're able to, force a turnover, hold on to the football, allow field possession to be a very valuable piece of this game, that would be a key for me. Quinn's been great in his career at holding on to the football and making sure that he doesn't turn balls over, Oklahoma aside. I think that would be one of the big keys, obviously. And, I understand turnovers are a big part of every game. But Georgia's not a defense, at least hasn't been the last 2 years, that has been overly opportunistic when it comes to jumping into passing lanes or going for strips on every rush attempt. So I think that was very interesting in my research of that defense. I wonder if they'll make a jump this year, but if that case remains again and we continue to see that trend outside of the top 100, Texas might have a shot there to really dominate that field possession there with just a first down punt or continued drives.
No, I like that because that could be the great kind of equalizer that can really flip the script. If you can win the turnover margin against a team like Georgia, and a lot of their advantages are mitigated because we know that can really flip a game at any point. Good stuff there, CJ. All right, before we get out of here, I got to share this stat and little tidbits as we're talking about some of the game planning potentially with Georgia and with Texas. Okay, so you talked about how Georgia 42-2 since 2021. Those 2 losses are to Nick Saban.
Oof.
Since 2020, Georgia is 50-4. 3 of their 4 losses to Nick Saban. Nick Saban is no longer around. So somebody's got to try to stop Kirby Smart, right? Because Nick Saban was the only one that really could do it. But I will say this. Nick Saban had a very interesting little tidbit of information at SEC Media Days. And he was talking about why he hates playing up against Steve Sarkisian or coaching against him. He said, quote, "I kind of always hated playing against Sark in practice for several years, as well as when we played them the past couple of years, because they do a good job with what I call squeeze splits. We play in this day and age where people take these huge splits like Tennessee, which that's a problem too. Players, especially DBs, are not used to playing when you have squeeze splits because you put them in unfamiliar positions, whether it's run support or how they cover. When you're in squeeze splits, how can this guy get to that side of the field quickly, which messes up your pattern matches? So I always hated playing against Texas. And Kirby has got some of the same issues that we had. He threw that in there. That was the last part of his Kirby Smart, which has a lot of connective tissue in terms of the philosophical and schematic, commonalities between those 2 systems, because obviously Saban was his mentor. He's gonna say, "Oh no, the same issues I had defending that damn Steve Sarkisian passing attack, Kirby Smart's gonna have them too, guys, because his system is my system. We got a lot of similarities in our system, so that's something to keep in mind." That's Saban pointing out. Oh no, it's a pain, and then you know what to defend them. And what do you mean by squeeze splits? Tight splits, reduced splits, condensed, compressed sets. In case everybody's got a different way of describing it.
Yeah, I look back at what Texas was able to do against Alabama, and some of those routes that you saw them get open with, right? It was a deep crossing route, and it was a boomerang route, which a boomerang is essentially a look at a deep crossing route. You get to about 10 yards over the cross of the middle of the field, and you return to the side in which you originally came from. Both of those were to Jatavian Sanders, right? We saw Texas utilize those, kind of cover 4 looks with the bombs to A.D. Mitchell. I believe it was actually a cover 3, but Xavier Worthy was a cover 4 look in which he just beat the safety deep. Obviously, they had Jonte Cook on the opposite side of that to attract the safety to the field side, in which he ran a 12-yard stop, making that field side safety draw down and respect that, that level of the field there. Mm-hmm. I imagine we'll see a very similar game plan against Alabama this year against Georgia. We'll see how much more of an unlock weapon you can have with Amari Niblack and that speed that he has versus a JT Sanders. That'll be really interesting to me, Rod.
Yeah, no, it really is. I can't wait for this chess match between, because Kirby Smart's a chess master. He is. Yeah. He's proven that. And I've always said Sark's got to become a chess master, and that means winning those first of all versus top 25 teams. That means beating really good teams. I think Sark is winning percentage under 30% there. You got to get better at that. You got to get better at winning some of those one-score games, fourth quarter comebacks, game-winning drives. I think a lot of this is going to come down to those potential situations, and that's being a chess master, trying to find a way to get the advantages in those margins against Georgia. If you want to do it, I love what you brought up about the turnovers. We want to see Sark at his best. He may become, if he wins that game, we might see him become a chess master. All right, this upcoming season. And if he is, that's a scary thought for the rest of college football. All right, then we'll be back next week to talk about Texas Week 9 opponent. That'll be Vanderbilt going on the road in the SEC. That'll be interesting for the Longhorns. We'll talk about that coming up next week. But thank you, CJ, for the time and for all the knowledge. I really, really appreciate that. And thank you guys for all of your time. We appreciate it. Until next time, for CJ Vogel, for the On Texas Football family, for myself, Hook 'em Horns.